Aurora Brown and intersectional psychology acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout South Africa and their connections to land, water, and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Indigenous people listening today. Hello, this is Aurora dropping in with a quick content note. This episode does include discussions of apartheid, colonialism, Gaza, and gender-based violence. If you're unable to engage with these topics right now, you're welcome to skip this episode or come back to it when you feel better resourced. Hello and welcome back to Intersectional Psychology, the podcast that explores psychology's role in promoting social justice. I'm your host, Aurora Brown. I'm a registered counsellor in Cape Town, South Africa. I hope you are well. Today we are starting off our series on decolonizing mental health. And I am thrilled to introduce the first ever guest on the podcast, Registered Counsellor Shaheeda Sadeck. Now, Shaheeda and I covered so much good content in this episode that I really struggled to edit it down. I didn't want you to miss out on any goodies. So I've decided to split the interview into two parts. Today, I'll share the first part of my conversation with Shaheeda, and next week, I'll release the second half. But if you can't wait until then for more content, you can find bonus material from this part of the interview and get early access to the second part over on the Patreon right now. Just go to patreon.com/intersectional psychology. I really appreciate the patrons who are helping to keep the lights on here at the podcast. But now let's get straight into the interview. Shaheeda Sadeck is a dedicated registered counsellor specializing in decolonial work with children and adults, especially in family systems. With a wealth of experience working in schools, colleges, communities, and non-profits, Shaheeda has honed her expertise in supporting emotional, social, and interpersonal growth. As an anti-apartheid activist in the 1970s and 1980s, a counselor, an educator, a mother, and a grandmother, she brings a unique perspective to her work, understanding the intricate dynamics of the socio-cultural factors at play in South African society today. Shaheeda's approach focuses on empowering people from diverse backgrounds to work together to create a supportive and inclusive environment that fosters social, emotional, and interpersonal success. Her experience has equipped her with the skills to address a range of challenges, from individual counseling to group workshops and family counseling. With a deep commitment to her work, Shaheeda strives to make a positive impact on the lives of under-resourced communities. Her warm, empathetic approach and her ability to connect with a wide range of people have earned her a reputation as a trusted and compassionate professional in her field. Through her work, Shaheeda aims to help people thrive and reach their full potential. And every time I have a conversation with Shaheeda, I come away feeling more inspired. So Shaheeda, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Aurora, and thank you. It's such an honor to be your first guest on this such significant work that you are doing. So thank you for having me.
So let's start with, what can we know about you and your work?
So I've been fortunate to share a very interesting life story with my family of origin. We were a family of 9, and now there are 4 of us that are still alive, not including our children or our grandchildren. And perhaps I should add, great-grandchildren. I continue my journey of life with nearly 45 years with my husband and life partner, a journey enriched by the presence of our 3 uniquely remarkable daughters and 3 equally extraordinary grandchildren. My life has been a vibrant tapestry woven with moments of profound beauty and deep challenges, each experience shaping my values and the lens through which I see the world. As I embrace the next chapter, I look forward to a more grounded, fulfilling life, one where learning, growth, and personal development remain constant, and where I can pass on wisdom, nurture new perspectives, and mentor the younger generations. As a mental health practitioner working within a decolonial framework, I recognize that psychological well-being is inseparable from systemic and structural oppression, historical trauma and resistance, and cultural and community contexts. My work, which includes providing mental health support on a preventative basis while promoting mental well-being, prioritizes those on the margins. Individuals navigating economic hardships, activists fighting for justice, and communities confronting displacement and discrimination, and the historically disadvantaged communities. In fostering collective healing, I integrate culturally responsive practice, faith-based resilience, and community-centered approaches to challenge colonial narratives in mental health. My approach acknowledges the historical and structural inequalities that shape mental health and therefore integrates social justice, collective care models, traditional healing practices, participatory methodology, community-based initiatives, holistic interventions, narrative therapy, and empowerment. Inspired by my own past as an anti-apartheid activist, global liberation movements, including the Palestinian resistance, as well as the struggles of marginalized communities across Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Burundi, and other regions affected by genocide and systemic violence, I advocate for justice not only in therapeutic spaces, but also in the broader fight against dispossession and structural oppression. These interconnected struggles demand a holistic approach to healing, one that acknowledges the psychological impact of war, forced state displacement, and state-sanctioned violence. My practice is committed to empowering individuals to sustain both their well-being and their activism, recognizing that healing is not just personal, but a tool for survival, solidarity, and transformation. I strive to create a space where healing becomes both personal and political, an act of resistance, transformation, and liberation.
Thank you for sharing that with us. You have such a wealth of experience across various communities. Can you tell us a bit about the communities that you serve?
So the 2 main communities that I serve are Mountain Road Primary School and the Institute for Healing of Memories, abbreviated as IOM. which is based in South Africa. At Mountain Road Primary, many families fall within the lower to medium income bracket. And while the school primarily serves its immediate surrounding areas, it also welcomes learners from outlying townships, predominantly colored and African communities, as well as a growing number of foreign nationals from other African countries. Despite the urgent need for a full-time school counselor, financial constraints make it impossible to establish a permanent role, as the position remains a governing body subsidized post. So in addition to my work at the school, I'm an associate member of IOM, Institute for Healing of Memories, which is a non-profit organization dedicated to fostering healing through a social justice lens. As a counselor and facilitator of psychoeducation workshops, I contribute to IOM's efforts to support individuals and communities affected by historical and systemic trauma. IOM has a significant presence across South Africa and its neighboring countries, with its headquarters in Cape Town and offices in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. Through its three key programs, Healing of Memories, Dialogues, and Youth, the organization engages participants from diverse civic organizations working to redress persistent inequalities stemming from apartheid's legacies. IOM focuses on addressing the psychological and emotional wounds caused by oppressive systems. Its mission is to empower individuals to process intergenerational trauma without perpetuating harm within the communities they serve. Many participants do not have access to medical aid, which makes my counseling services particularly vital. Since mental health services are only available to those who have attended IOM's programs, the organization relies on fundraising efforts to ensure individuals receive support at no cost. For me, barefoot counseling came alive in the kitchen of a dedicated community activist in Bonteheuwel, where I conducted a needs assessment for psychoeducation workshops funded by IOM. That moment was a profound reminder that healing begins where the need is greatest, often in spaces not traditionally associated with formal mental health support.
Shaheeda, I've heard you talk about your grandchildren, so I imagine working with the kids at that school is quite rewarding for you. Also, until I had met you, I had never heard of the Institute for Healing of Memories. And even that name, the concept, the healing of memories, is so beautiful and affirming. What are some of the most common presenting complaints related to mental health in those communities?
So mental health concerns in these communities often stem from systemic challenges such as poverty, ongoing stress and trauma, and limited access to healthcare. Some of the most common presenting complaints include depression, stress, anxiety, and high levels of stress, financial insecurity, and social instability contribute to widespread incidents of depressive episodes and anxiety. Then many individuals in low and medium income communities experience profound and sustained stress stemming from violence, displacement, crime, gangsterism, gender-based violence, and historical oppression. While this is often framed in terms of PTSD, the reality in these communities is more accurately described as ongoing, persistent, compound stress resulting from systemic challenges. The chronic nature of this distress, rooted in socioeconomic instability, intergenerational trauma, and structural inequality, creates an ongoing state of emotional and psychological strain rather than isolated traumatic episodes. That's not to say traumatic incidents do not in fact occur. Without access to adequate support systems, individuals navigate daily adversity that continuously reinforces their lived experience of trauma. Then alcohol and drug abuse are often used as coping mechanisms in communities facing economic hardship and social marginalization. And I've sometimes used the word alcohol use as opposed to alcohol abuse because alcohol abuse just sounds so negative in certain contexts. Then many individuals report physical symptoms such as headaches, fatigue, and digestive issues, which are often linked to underlying mental health struggles. And often I see that in school as well, with children who present with anxiety around the school environment. Due to the stigma and lack of resources, individuals with severe mental illnesses often go undiagnosed or untreated, but that is changing. The issue of stigma is becoming much less, and I often think it's because of the really hard work that registered counselors have put into communities in terms of destigmatizing mental health. Historical injustices such as apartheid or colonization continue to affect mental health across generations, leading to cycles of distress. Then we all know that grief and loss are natural human experiences, but they can absolutely have a profound impact on mental health. While grief itself is not classified as a mental illness, it can trigger significant emotional distress and in some cases lead to mental health conditions such as depression, anxiety, or prolonged or complicated grief, where the grieving process becomes debilitating and persistent. The experience of loss, be it from death, separation, displacement, or even loss of identity or opportunity, can deeply affect a person's emotional and psychological well-being. Factors like social support, coping mechanisms, and access to mental health care play a critical role in determining whether grief resolves naturally over time, where one recognizes that grief changes you profoundly or develops into a more serious mental health concern. I see grief manifesting in complex ways that are influenced by systemic challenges such as intergenerational trauma, socioeconomic hardships, or historical oppression, as well as personal family dynamics. Supporting people in processing their grief in a healthy way can be key to their emotional resilience. Limited mental health infrastructure and cultural stigma often prevent individuals from seeking help, making community-based interventions crucial for addressing these concerns. Sometimes children are sent way too soon for grief counseling, and that is just because people become awkward, and sometimes educators and families and parents don't know how to support the child. So many of the general public don't often understand the normality of altered thoughts, feelings, or behaviors immediately after the bereavement or in the journey of grief processing. So I suppose in all the different things that present itself, all the different types of cases that present themselves, there's often an element of grief, loss, and relationship issues.
It sounds like there's a lot of trauma and inequity underlying those issues. What are the historical, socioeconomic, and cultural factors that contribute to those mental health challenges?
Okay, let's start with the historical. So the historical injustice of colonialism and apartheid have left deep scars, contributing to systemic inequality, social fragmentation, and intergenerational trauma. Many communities were forcibly removed from their homes during apartheid, leading to loss of social support networks and increased psychological distress. And I'm not even talking about all of the other draconian laws that were used to separate and dehumanize the majority of South Africans. And then we move on to, or I'd like to speak about the socioeconomic factors. So high levels of poverty and unemployment, crime, violence, creates chronic stress, increasing vulnerability to mental health disorders. Mental health services are often underfunded, leaving communities with inadequate support. Alcohol and drug use are prevalent in certain areas, which increases mental health issues and worsens it. And exposure to violence, crime, and gang activity contributes to anxiety, depression, and ongoing stress response, as well as post-traumatic stress disorder. And last, cultural factors. Cultural beliefs often associate mental illnesses with weakness or supernatural causes, which discourages individuals from seeking professional help. Some communities rely on traditional healers solely, rather than formal mental health services or a combination of traditional and the more formal professional services. And this can delay treatment. Strong family and community ties can provide support, but in some cases, they may also reinforce harmful stigmas or discourage open discussions around the stress and mental health.
And what types of clients do you mostly work with?
So most of my referrals at school are because of behavioral challenges parents or educators experience with their children. I use that opportunity when I meet with the educators and parents to provide some psychoeducation around the issues that present itself, taking into account contextual factors, historical factors, and why and what they can do to support the child, and how important it is for them to provide a safe, nurturing space for the child to thrive. I also provide mental health services to individuals and community activists who come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds and historically disadvantaged backgrounds. Many of them are deeply engaged in various social justice movements, advocating for change while navigating their own personal challenges. My work focuses on offering support, resilience building, or resilience maintenance, and resources to help them sustain their well-being while making a meaningful impact in their communities.
You know, hearing that so many of your clients are involved in social justice work, firstly, it makes my heart really happy, but it also sounds like you are really providing care for the carers. How did you come to serve this group of people?
So let me start with the school. Just before I graduated, I literally went door to door at neighborhood schools offering to volunteer my services. And once I'd qualified, and despite having children of my own, I was incredibly nervous at first about working with students. My initial goal, or children, my initial goal was simply to explore whether I would enjoy and be effective in this environment. Over time, I realized that my approach, viewing the individual as a system within a system and within a broader context, made me a highly effective counselor. This realization led me to continue my involvement with the school, not only for my own professional growth, but also to ensure that the school community had access to vital mental health services. On the other hand, my path to serving social justice activists in low and middle income countries and communities as a mental health practitioner has been deeply personal, rooted in my own values and purpose driven. Recognizing the profound impact of systemic inequalities, historical injustices, and socioeconomic barriers, I was drawn to the intersection of mental health and social justice. And through my work, I witnessed firsthand how activists, often the voices for marginalized communities, face immense psychological burdens, from burnout and secondary trauma to the emotional toll of advocacy in hostile environments. Many operate in regions where mental health services are scarce or inaccessible, yet their resilience and commitment remain unwavering. This awareness led me to focus my practice on providing culturally sensitive, trauma informed mental health support tailored to the unique needs of activists. My approach integrates advocacy and healing, ensuring that those who fight for justice receive the care they deserve. By bridging the gap between mental health services and grassroots movements, I aim to empower activists to sustain their work without sacrificing their well-being.
Much of your work has focused on decolonizing mental health practice in those communities. What brought you to this interest in decoloniality?
So I never explicitly identified myself as a decolonial activist. Rather, I saw myself as an anti-apartheid activist who examined race, class, and gender as sites of struggle through a critical lens. In that same spirit, I approach mental health through both a decolonial and critical framework, recognizing the enduring effects of structural oppression, systemic oppression, and seeking to dismantle barriers to healing. My interest in decoloniality within mental health practice stems from a deep awareness of how social injustices, systemic inequalities, and Western centric frameworks have shaped mental health care in low and middle income communities. I came to realize that conventional mental health models often fail to acknowledge the lived experiences, cultural strengths, and indigenous knowledge system of the very communities that they aim to serve. Through my work, I have witnessed how colonial legacies continue to manifest in disparities in access. I've noticed the pathologizing of cultural expressions of distress and the dismissal of non-Western healing traditions. This realization fueled my commitment to challenge these structures and advocate for a more inclusive and contextually relevant approach that honors the wisdom of communities and promotes healing beyond the confines of Eurocentric models. Recognizing these injustices fueled my commitment to challenging these structures and advocating for a mental health approach that is truly inclusive, contextually relevant, and rooted in justice. Decolonizing mental health for me is not just about reforming practices, it's about dismantling systemic barriers and restoring agency both to individuals and communities, recognizing their resilience and ensuring that healing is informed by equity, cultural humility, and historical awareness. So one example is the ongoing pathologization of culturally specific expressions of distress, such as communal healing, practices, or spiritual interpretations of trauma, which are often dismissed within Western psychiatric frameworks. This reinforces the idea that only Eurocentric models of mental health are valid marginalizing indigenous knowledge and healing traditions. Furthermore, economic inequities, such as the link between poverty and mental illness, creates a cycle of distress where individuals facing financial hardships struggle to access care due to prohibitive costs or the lack of insurance coverage.
It's me, Aurora. Please excuse me interrupting my own podcast. I'm just here to say that I will never include third-party ads on intersectional psychology, which is great because it means that you can be sure all the mental health information and content shared here is free from corporate influence and bias. However, it also means that this podcast will only be made possible by support from you, the listener. So if you enjoy this podcast or find value in it, please consider joining my Patreon, or Matreon rather, for as little as $3 per month. Your contributions will be used to improve this podcast, to cover the production costs to research, write, record, and edit each episode, and to host our guests. In return, you'll get exclusive Matreon benefits like bonus episodes, additional guided mindfulness recordings, early access to new episodes, extended episodes and outtakes, group discussions, and more. So just go to patreon.com and search for Intersectional Psychology. Thanks, and back to Intersectional Psychology. So what I'm hearing from you is that South Africa is still greatly feeling the effects of apartheid today. And your work is about dismantling the legacy of that impact on people's mental health. What exactly does this work involve?
So in all aspects of my practice, whether teaching, training, counseling, facilitating, psychoeducational workshops, or conducting screening assessments, I center decolonized and critical mental health principles. My teaching and training challenge dominant Western psychiatric narratives and emphasizing culturally responsive, context-specific approaches that recognize the lived realities of individuals in the communities that I work in. In individual counseling, I create spaces where clients can explore their experiences without the constraints of Eurocentric diagnostic frameworks, validating indigenous and collective healing practices. My psychoeducation workshops aim to dismantle stigma and provide accessible community-driven mental health knowledge, empowering individuals with tools for resilience rooted in their own cultural and context, very specific to their own context. So through screening assessments, and I tend to use a more narrative approach to screen, I prioritize structural and systemic factors influencing distress and ensuring that evaluations do not reinforce oppressive categorizations, but instead advocate for holistic, intersectional understandings of mental health. Across all activities, I aim to deconstruct traditional hierarchies, ensuring that healing is collaborative, affirming, and justice-orientated. So in applying a decolonial approach to counseling, it requires intentional strategies that challenge colonial narratives and uplift marginalized voices. I incorporate these principles by trying to create, again, safe spaces and approaches that affirm the lived experiences, identities, and histories of my clients. This includes recognizing power dynamics and making space for their voices. Unfortunately, my space is not physically welcoming for people with physical challenges, and therefore I see very few clients with physical challenges. I try as much as possible to collaborate with traditional healers, religious leaders, and recognize that spiritual and communal practices and needs to be incorporated into culturally relevant treatment planning and coping mechanisms such as storytelling, rituals, or collective care. I make a very concerted effort to be mindful of the language I use and move away from pathologizing language and instead use strength-based narratives and where I reframe mental health challenges in ways that honor resilience, agency, and legacy. I engage in therapeutic approaches that prioritize client storytelling, resistance, and social justice, and support clients in reclaiming their narratives, explore historical trauma, and position themselves within movements for change. In my continuous professional development, I critically assess dominant psychological theories and approaches and recognize their limitations in addressing the complexities of oppression and colonial histories, and try and use methodologies rooted in Afrocentric, indigenous, and other culturally affirming perspectives. My own formal CPD journey focuses on upskilling myself, while my informal CPD involves extensive reading to deepen my understanding of how mental health is intricately linked to economic, political, and social conditions. This knowledge strengthens my commitment to advocacy beyond the therapy room, supporting clients in securing housing, education, employment, and justice. I strive to create a collaborative space where clients feel empowered rather than directed by an external authority. Shared decision making and validation of their lived experiences are central to my work ethic. To uphold these values, I remain engaged in supervision, individually, in groups, and with peers, allowing me to critically reflect on my own biases, privileges, and the ways in which traditional mental health frameworks may inadvertently perpetuate harm. Thanks, Aurora. I hope that's answered your question.
So, your work is much more community oriented than the traditional idea of counseling. How can social practice enhance the principles of psychology?
Oh, it can definitely enhance the practice of psychology by integrating community engagement, cultural awareness, and systemic change into therapeutic approaches. By contextualizing mental health, practitioners in this profession can understand how social structures, economic conditions, and historical injustices shape individual and collective well-being. So instead of focusing solely on an individual or individual therapy, social psychology encourages group interventions, peer supported networks, and culturally relevant healing practices. It creates an opportunity to address social determinants of mental health, such as housing, employment or unemployment, education, discrimination, and the crucial role in psychological well being. and ensures that these are considered in treatment plans. Mental health practitioners can use social practice to challenge oppressive systems, advocate for mental health accessibility, and support marginalized communities. So by integrating social psychology practices, practitioners can improve communication, behavior change strategies, and group dynamics in counseling. Practitioners can facilitate support groups, workshops, and safe spaces where people can collectively process experiences and build resilience. Counseling can go way beyond the therapy room by engaging with activists, educators, and grassroots organizations to integrate mental health care into broader social movements. Work alongside communities to co-create solutions tailored to their unique needs rather than imposing external psychological models. I strongly believe that if we blend psychology with art, storytelling, spirituality, and activism, we would be able to provide culturally resonant care. We need to support systemic changes that improve access to psychological care for marginalized groups. And we need to empower our clients as agents of change by facilitating a process where they can see their mental health as interconnected with their environment and equip them with tools to navigate both their personal and social struggles.
I love that. Now, South Africa, which Desmond Tutu called the Rainbow Nation, is extremely multicultural. We have 12 official languages, each representing a distinct culture and community. And some of them even have different predominant faiths. Can you talk a bit more about the role of multiculturalism and diverse faith based practices like community and prayer and their relationship with Western psychology?
So, multiculturalism and diverse faith based practices indeed play a significant role in shaping psychological well being, often challenging and expanding traditional Western psychology. Western psychology has historically emphasized individualism, whereas many multicultural and faith based traditions prioritize communal healing. In many cultures, mental health is seen as interconnected with family, community, and spiritual well being. Group therapy, shared rituals, and collective support systems can be powerful alternatives to individual therapy. Faith based practices like prayer, meditation, and spiritual reflection can serve as coping mechanisms, fostering resilience and emotional regulation. While Western psychology often focuses on cognitive and behavioral interventions, integrating spirituality can enhance therapeutic outcomes. And I think today we often call it mindfulness. And a lot of spiritual practices has mindfulness as part of its components. So especially for clients who find meaning and strength in their faith. So many non-Western traditions view mental health holistically, incorporating mind, body, and spirit, the mindfulness aspect that I was talking about. Practices such as yoga, mindfulness, fasting, and traditional healing methods are increasingly recognized in psychology for their benefits in reducing stress and promoting emotional balance. Western psychology has sometimes pathologized spiritual experiences, labeling them as symptoms of mental illness rather than valid expressions of belief or distress. A decolonial approach encourages psychologists to respect and integrate diverse cultural and spiritual perspectives rather than dismiss them. Multicultural and faith-based perspectives push psychology to expand its frameworks, and it incorporates narrative therapy, indigenous healing practices, and interfaith counseling. This ensures therapy is culturally responsive and aligns with clients' worldviews.
Clients have sought traditional healing in the past. I've also always found it more effective to work in consort with the traditional healer rather than to reject their whole paradigm, which would just create more confusion and trauma for the client. I mean, we don't judge a client's faith practices when they're Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Hindu. So what excuse would we have for treating traditional healers differently than that? Like you said before, it's all about what is in the best interests of the client. So that's it for the first half of my interview with Registered Counsellor Shaheeda Sadeck. In the next episode, I'll share the second half of our interview, in which we cover the growing Islamophobia worldwide and its impact on Muslims in South Africa, the mental health challenges of queer Muslims in Cape Town, the connections between South Africa and Palestine that led South Africa to file the case against Israel at the International Court of Justice, and what Palestine has to do with decoloniality. Why South African healthcare workers have a responsibility to speak out against the genocide in Gaza, and what we all can do to end the conflict there, as well as more detail on the work of the Institute for Healing of Memories. But if you can't wait until then, you can head over to patreon.com/intersectional psychology for loads more bonus content from my interview with Shaheeda right now. See you again next week. Thank you for listening to Intersectional Psychology. Please follow or subscribe to the podcast to get every episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review Intersectional Psychology in your preferred app. It really helps other people find the podcast. This episode of Intersectional Psychology was researched, written, recorded, and edited by me, Aurora Brown. For a transcript of this episode, please see the link in the show notes on your podcast app or go to intersectionalpsychology.com. You can also check the website or the show notes for a full list of references for this episode. A video of this episode with closed captions is available on youtube.com/@intersectional psychology. To support this podcast and get access to bonus content, including additional episodes and interviews, as well as more guided mindfulness sessions, please go to patreon.com/intersectional psychology. You can also chat with me on Blue Sky at intersectpsych.bsky.social and Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok at Intersectional Psychology. But mostly Blue Sky. Aurora Brown and Intersectional Psychology are committed to the Sight Black Women Praxis. All episodes of Intersectional Psychology are for educational purposes only and are not intended to be a substitute for professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. I, Aurora Brown, am not able to answer specific questions about individual situations. Always seek the advice of your health provider with any questions you may have regarding a mental health condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard or seen on this podcast. If you think you need immediate assistance, please call your local emergency number or any mental health crisis hotline. Everyone deserves good mental health.